The setting, Whitechapel, London, 1888. London in the late 1800s was a city divided. On the west side there was grandeur, gaslights, opera houses, and the glitter of empire. But in the East End, especially Whitechapel, it was a different world entirely. Overcrowded, filthy, and dangerous, Whitechapel was home to the poorest of the poor. Immigrants, sex workers, the unemployed, and those simply trying to survive. There was no sanitation, little law enforcement, and barely any medical help. Streets reeked of waste. Alleys swarmed with rats. Crime was a daily occurrence, and women who couldn't afford a roof over their head often turned to prostitution just to eat. It was in this desperate corner of Victorian London that the Ripper emerged. The first known victim, Mary Ann Nichols. The terror began on Friday, August 31st, 1888. At 3:40 a.m., a carman named Charles Cross discovered a woman's body on Bucks Row, now known as Durward Street. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols, known locally as Polly. She was 43 years old, a mother, an alcoholic, and she'd turned to sex work after being kicked out of a workhouse. Polly's throat had been slashed twice, nearly to the spine. Her lower abdomen had been savagely mutilated, but the most chilling part? There was barely any blood on the ground, suggesting the killer knew how to minimize the mess, or struck with terrifying speed. Scotland Yard was called in, but the Victorian police had no forensic science, no fingerprints, no DNA. All they had were chalk lines and crude sketches, and no witnesses. The pattern begins. Annie Chapman. Just over a week later, on September 8th, the Ripper struck again. Annie Chapman, age 47, was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. She, too, was a sex worker. She, too, had lived a hard life, and she was murdered even more violently than Polly. Her throat was slashed, her abdomen was ripped open, and her uterus had been removed with surgical precision. This was no random street thug. The mutilation suggested anatomical knowledge, perhaps even medical training. Rumors spread. Was the killer a doctor, a butcher, or someone far worse? Fear gripped Whitechapel. Women refused to go out at night. Men formed vigilante groups, and the press gave him a name, the Whitechapel Fiend. That would soon change. The double event, 2 murders, 1 night. On the night of September 30th, 1888, the killer escalated. 2 women, 2 locations, less than an hour apart. Victim 3, Elizabeth Stride. At 1 a.m., Elizabeth Stride, known as Long Liz, was found in Dutfield's yard. Her throat had been cut, but she hadn't been mutilated like the others. Why? Most experts believe the Ripper was interrupted mid-kill. Maybe he heard footsteps. Maybe someone walked too close. So he vanished into the fog and kept hunting. Victim 4, Catherine Eddowes. Just 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. Her murder was the worst yet. Her throat was slashed, her abdomen mutilated. Her kidney and part of her uterus were missing. Her face was disfigured, nose slashed, eyelids cut. And worst of all, her intestines were laid across her shoulder. This was ritualistic, intentional, cruel. For the first time, the newspapers printed maps showing where each body had been found. The public was in a frenzy. London was in full panic. The message from hell. Following the double murder, the police received something chilling. On October 1st, the Central News Agency received a letter signed Jack the Ripper. It read in part, "I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." The media ran with it. The name Jack the Ripper exploded across front pages. Then, 2 days later, something even worse arrived. A small box containing half a human kidney, preserved in alcohol. The accompanying letter said, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman." The writer claimed to have fried and eaten the other half. The letter was signed, "Catch me when you can." Handwriting analysts later debated its authenticity, but the kidney, it was real, and it matched the missing organ from Catherine Eddowes. Public reaction, fear, rage, and racism. As the Ripper killings continued, Londoners demanded action, but there was little police could do. Fingerprinting wasn't used yet. Crime scene management was non-existent. And the East End was so crowded and chaotic, a killer could disappear into the night within seconds. Anger turned to paranoia. The streets of Whitechapel were flooded with posters offering rewards. Men were arrested at random. Whispers spread through the alleys. Was the killer a Jew, a foreigner, an aristocrat? The anti-immigrant hate exploded. Jewish communities were blamed. Innocent men were beaten in the street. One message, found scrawled on a wall near a bloody piece of Eddowes' apron, read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Scotland Yard erased it quickly, afraid it would spark riots. Meanwhile, the Ripper vanished again into the fog. The final known victim, Mary Jane Kelly. On November 9th, 1888, the Ripper killed again. Mary Jane Kelly was just 25. Young, beautiful, and unlike the others, she had her own room in a lodging house at 13 Miller's Court. That gave the killer privacy, and the results were horrifying. Mary Jane's body was discovered in her bed, completely mutilated beyond recognition. Her face was destroyed, her chest flayed, her internal organs scattered around the room. Her heart was missing. The room looked like a battlefield. The killer had taken his time. Police officers were physically sick upon seeing it. One inspector said, "The sight we saw I shall never forget. It looked more like the work of a devil than of a man." After Mary Jane Kelly, the killings stopped. Or at least, the killings we know of. Who was Jack the Ripper? A doctor? A madman? A prince? In Part 2, we examine the suspects, the myths, and the unanswered questions that still haunt the alleys of Whitechapel to this day. The investigation, a city lost in the fog. After the savage murder of Mary Jane Kelly on November 9th, 1888, the killings seemed to stop as suddenly as they began. But the fear didn't. Scotland Yard had failed to catch the killer, and the public wanted answers. But detectives had little to work with. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no surveillance, no centralized crime database. Their best hope? Someone would slip up or confess. But no one ever did. Instead, something else took over. Speculation. How many did he really kill? We remember the canonical five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. All were sex workers. All were killed within 3 months. All in or near Whitechapel. But dozens of other women were murdered in similar ways across London between 1887 and 1891. Could some of those have been Ripper victims too? Police and modern Ripperologists Yes, it's a real field of study, still debated today. Some believe Jack may have killed more than a dozen. Others think only 3 of the 5 were his. But one thing's clear. The killer knew how to disappear. The suspects, the most chilling theories. Over the decades, more than 100 suspects have been proposed. Some logical, some wild. Let's look at the most compelling. 1. Montague John Druitt. Who was he? A barrister and school teacher who committed suicide in December 1888, just weeks after the final canonical murder. Why is he a suspect? A senior officer wrote that the Ripper was a doctor and committed suicide shortly after the last murder. Many believe he meant Druitt, but Druitt had no known medical training, and no direct evidence ever linked him to the crimes. 2. Aaron Kosminski. Who was he? A Polish-Jewish immigrant barber by trade, living in Whitechapel. Why is he a suspect? He suffered from severe mental illness and was institutionalized after the murders. Police files mention a Kosminski as a prime suspect who was watched closely. In 2014, a controversial study claimed DNA from a shawl at the Eddowes crime scene matched Kosminski's descendants. But that evidence was widely disputed. Still, many modern experts consider him the most likely suspect. 3. Michael Ostrog. Who was he? A Russian-born thief and con artist with a violent past. Why is he a suspect? He was included in the official suspect list by Scotland Yard. But later, researchers found he was in prison during the murders. Ostrog is now considered an unlikely candidate. Search for Dr. Thomas Neil Cream. Who was he? A physician hanged in 1892 for poisoning prostitutes in London. Why is he a suspect? He reportedly said, "I am Jack before the trapdoor dropped at his execution, but prison records show he was locked up during the Ripper murders. The timeline doesn't fit, but conspiracy theorists still love his last words. 5. Prince Albert Victor, a.k.a. Prince Eddie. Who was he? The grandson of Queen Victoria. Why is he a suspect? Royal conspiracy theorists claim he had secret affairs with prostitutes, contracted syphilis, and went mad, supposedly murdering women to cover it all up. But court records show he was not even in London on key murder nights. Historians widely dismiss this theory as fantasy, though it remains one of the most popular among Ripper mythologists. The letters, communication, or cruel hoaxes. During the killings, the press and police received hundreds of letters claiming to be from the killer. Most were hoaxes, but 3 stood out. 1. Dear Boss letter, September 25th, 1888. First to use the name Jack the Ripper, written in red ink, taunting police, promised to clip the lady's ears off. Days later, Catherine Eddowes was found with her earlobe cut. 2. Saucy Jackie, postcard, October 1st, 1888. Referenced the double event murders, arrived before that information was public. 3. From Hell, letter, October 16th, 1888. Sent to George Lusk, head of a Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, included half a human kidney. Many believe this is the only genuine communication from the Ripper. Was he a doctor? A butcher? A sadist? The brutality of the murders, especially the precision organ removals, led some to believe the Ripper had medical knowledge. Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon at the time, disagreed. He believed the killer was subject to periodic attacks of homicidal and erotic mania. The desire to mutilate the victim arose from a morbid sexual impulse. In short, not a skilled surgeon, just a sadistic killer with rage and impulse. Still, the question remains, how did he manage 5 savage murders in a packed city without being caught? Media madness, birth of the serial killer hysteria. Jack the Ripper wasn't just a murderer, he was the first modern media monster. Victorian newspapers were exploding in popularity, and the Ripper case sold papers fast. Every gory detail was printed. Sketches of bodies, letters from the killer, diagrams of the crime scenes. Sensationalism ruled. The public couldn't get enough. People gathered at murder sites. Vendors sold Ripper tours, even then. Conspiracy theories flourished in pubs. In many ways, Jack the Ripper was the first viral killer, and he set the template for every serial killer obsession that followed. The police response: too little, too late. The Ripper murders revealed major weaknesses in Victorian policing. Officers patrolled poorly lit streets, alone. Crime scenes were often trampled by curious onlookers. Medical examiners disagreed over times of death and cause. There was no formal coordination between local police and Scotland Yard. As pressure mounted, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Charles Warren, resigned in disgrace. Scotland Yard had failed to stop a killer who struck 5 times in their jurisdiction. Theories that still haunt today. Historians and amateur sleuths still debate the Ripper's identity. Some believe he fled London or was arrested for another crime, committed suicide or was institutionalized, switched victims to different areas to avoid detection, died shortly after the final murder. Others believe there's been a cover-up all along, perhaps by the Freemasons, the royal family, or even Scotland Yard. But there's no hard evidence, just speculation. Why the case still captivates. It's been over 135 years, but Jack the Ripper continues to haunt books, films, documentaries, and now YouTube. Why? Because it's unfinished. Because the victims were real, but the killer became legend. Because in a city filled with noise, the Ripper left only silence. The image of fog-covered gas lamps, of footsteps in a dark alley, of a black-cloaked figure vanishing into the night, it taps into our primal fear of the unknown. And the fact that he got away still chills us. The legacy, fact versus folklore. Jack the Ripper wasn't the most prolific serial killer in history, but he's the most famous. His crimes triggered modern criminal profiling, better forensic techniques, an obsession with serial killers that continues today. But perhaps, most importantly, it exposed how society ignored its most vulnerable. The women he killed were poor, homeless, often forgotten. The Ripper forced the world to look at the people it tried to ignore. Jack the Ripper may never be identified, his face lost to time, his name buried beneath lies and shadows. But the women he murdered, they had names, they had stories, and that is the truth that matters most.